Hey besties, before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now, where you're watching from. Whether it's sunrise in Jamaica, midnight in California, afternoon in Paris, or evening in South Africa, I want to know. Don't just sit back, tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. Aduni's knees hit the marble floor of the Olumide mansion with a crack that echoed through the grand foyer. The DNA test results fluttered from her trembling fingers like dying butterflies, each page a dagger to her heart. 23 years of scrubbing these floors, polishing these mirrors, serving meals to people who wouldn't meet her eyes. 23 years of believing she was nothing more than the orphaned daughter of their former gate man. Chief Mrs. Folklore Olumide stood frozen at the top of the mahogany staircase, her gold jewelry catching the afternoon light streaming through stained glass windows. Her face had drained of all color, lips moving soundlessly as if trying to swallow words that had already escaped. The crystal chandelier above cast dancing shadows across her guilt-stricken features. "You knew," Aduni whispered, her voice breaking like glass against stone. "All these years, you knew I was your daughter." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the grandfather clock in the corner seemed to hold its breath. Mrs. Folokle's manicured hand gripped the banister so tightly her knuckles turned white. In that moment, the entire foundation of Aduni's world crumbled beneath her feet. But this was only the beginning of a truth so devastating it would shake the Olumide family to its very core. 3 months earlier, the cramped apartment above Baba Saleh's provisions store smelled of palm oil and desperation. 8-year-old Aduni pressed her ear against the thin wall, listening to Mama Kemi's ragged cough echoing from the next room. Each wheeze felt like a countdown timer on their borrowed time together. "She needs medicine I can't afford," Kemi whispered to the shadowy figure seated across from her at their wobbling wooden table. Chief Olumide's expensive cologne clashed with the scent of yesterday's unsold plantains. His black leather briefcase sat between them like a bridge to salvation or damnation. Moonlight filtered through cracked windows, casting silver lines across Kemi's sunken cheeks. Her once beautiful face, ravaged by illness and poverty, still held traces of the woman who had once danced at Lagos society parties, before the scandal, before the shame, before she was forced to disappear with her secret. The Olumide estate in Ikoyi stretched like a fortress of dreams behind towering gates. Aduni's small fingers pressed against the tinted window of Chief Olumide's Mercedes as they drove through perfectly manicured gardens where peacocks strutted across emerald lawns. The mansion rose before them like something from her storybooks, all white columns and gleaming windows that reflected the Lagos skyline. But dreams, she would learn, often became nightmares in disguise. Mrs. Folokle emerged from the front entrance wearing a flowing Ankara dress that cost more than Mama Kemi's yearly rent. Her smile was as artificial as the plastic flowers in the hospital where Kemi lay dying. "Welcome to your new home, small girl," she said, her voice honey-sweet but her eyes cold as harmattan wind. Behind her stood Kemi's identical twin daughters, Funmi and Bukola, dressed in matching yellow sundresses with ribbons in their hair. They watched Aduni with the same calculating gaze as their mother, already marking territory like lionesses protecting their pride. "She'll sleep in the boys' quarters with the other staff," Mrs. Folokle announced, crushing Aduni's naive hope that she might share the beautiful bedrooms she glimpsed through open doorways. "Tunde will show you where to put your things." The ancient gateman who had driven her here gestured toward a small building behind the main house. As they walked across the compound, Aduni caught sight of a swimming pool that sparkled like diamonds under the afternoon sun. The twins' laughter echoed from its depths, carefree and musical. She didn't know then that she would spend the next 15 years watching that pool from her window, never allowed to swim in it. Years melted together like candle wax in the Nigerian heat. Aduni grew from a confused child into a beautiful young woman, her intelligence shining despite the shadows cast by her circumstances. She learned to read Mrs. Foloke's moods like weather patterns, the tight smile that meant extra chores, the sharp tone that meant missed meals, the cold silence that meant she had somehow forgotten her place.
Chief Olumide remained a distant figure, appearing and disappearing like smoke. When their paths crossed, he would pause, his eyes lingering on her face with an expression she couldn't decipher. Sometimes she caught him staring from his study window as I hung laundry in the garden, his face clouded with something that looked like regret. The twins treated her like furniture, present but invisible, useful but unworthy of acknowledgement. Fumi, the elder by 12 minutes, had inherited her mother's sharp tongue and sharper ambitions. Bukala was softer, sometimes leaving extra food on her plate when their mother wasn't watching, but never brave enough to cross the invisible lines that kept them in separate worlds. Late at night, when the mansion settled into its silence, Aduni would press her face to her small window and watch the main house glow with warm light. She invented stories about the family inside, imagining Sunday dinners filled with laughter, bedtime stories, and goodnight kisses. She dreamed of belonging somewhere to someone. But dreams were dangerous things in a house built on secrets, and some secrets had a way of demanding their due. The morning everything changed started like any other. Aduni was polishing the family portraits that lined the main hallway when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. In the newest photograph, a professional family portrait taken for Chief Olumade's 60th birthday, she could see her own features reflected back at her like a mirror. The same high cheekbones that belonged to Mrs. Folake, the same deep-set eyes that belonged to Chief Olumade, the same stubborn chin that marked all the Olumade children. How had she never noticed before? Her cleaning cloth fell to the marble floor with a whisper as soft as a prayer. 23 years of questions suddenly crystallized into one terrible possibility. The way Chief Olumade's jaw tightened whenever she called him sir. The way Mrs. Falake's hand trembled when passing her in the corridor. The way the twins' friends sometimes stared at her with confused recognition. "What are you doing standing there like a statue?" Mrs. Falake's voice cut through her thoughts like a machete through grass. She stood in the doorway wearing a green lace Iro and Buba, dressed for another charity luncheon where she would play the perfect Lego socialite wife. "Nothing, Ma," Aduni whispered, quickly retrieving her cloth. But her eyes betrayed her, darting back to the portrait with its impossible truth staring back at her. Mrs. Falake followed her gaze and froze. For one heartbeat, 2 heartbeats, 3 heartbeats. The mask slipped from her face, revealing something raw and terrified underneath. Then the wall slammed back up, higher and stronger than before. "Get back to work," she hissed, her voice sharp enough to draw blood. But it was too late. The first crack had appeared in their carefully constructed lie. Determination burned in Aduni's chest like pepper soup on a cold night. She waited until the house settled into its afternoon siesta rhythm before slipping into Chief Olumade's study. The room smelled of leather-bound books and expensive cigars, walls lined with certificates and photographs chronicling a life of power and privilege. Her hands shook as she opened filing cabinets, searching for anything that might confirm or deny the terrible suspicion growing in her heart. Birth certificates, bank statements, property deeds, but nothing with her name. Nothing that acknowledged her existence in this family beyond a line item in the household expense ledger. Then she found it. Hidden behind a folder of business contracts, a single photograph that made her world tilt on its axis. Chief Olumade, 25 years younger, his arm around a woman who looked exactly like Mrs. Falake, but wasn't. The woman's smile was genuine, her eyes bright with love and hope. At the bottom, written in fading ink, Kemi and Teo, Lagos, 1999. Her mother, her real mother, who had died believing her daughter would find a better life. But why did she look so much like Mrs. Falake? Why did they share the same face, the same bone structure, the same... "Oh God," Aduni whispered, the truth hitting her like a thunderbolt. The study door creaked open behind her. Chief Olumade stood in the doorway, his face a mask of resignation and sorrow. He looked older than his 60 years, the weight of buried secrets bending his shoulders like a heavy load. "I wondered when you would find that," he said quietly, closing the door behind him. You have your mother's curiosity and her courage. The photograph trembled in Aduni's hands like a captured bird. 23 years of questions were about to be answered, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for the truth. Chief Olumide sank into his leather chair like a man carrying the weight of the world. His hands, usually so steady in business negotiations, shook as he poured himself a glass of palm wine from the bottle he kept for special occasions. Or perhaps, Aduni thought, for moments when the past refused to stay buried.
"Your mother was the most beautiful woman in Lagos," he began, his voice thick with memory and regret. Kemi and Falake were identical twins, but Kemi, she had light in her eyes that could make the sun jealous. I was already engaged to Falake. Our families had arranged it when we were children, but when I met Kemi at a friend's wedding, he paused, staring out the window at the garden where Aduni had spent her childhood watching the family she longed to join. I fell in love with the wrong twin. We tried to stay apart, tried to honor family expectations, but love doesn't ask permission, does it? Aduni's heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. She thought about all the nights she had wondered about her father, creating elaborate fantasies about the man who had given her life. She had never imagined he was sleeping just 2 floors above her all these years. When Kemi discovered she was pregnant with you, everything changed. Falake had just given birth to the twins, and she was fragile. The shame would have destroyed both families, so we made an impossible choice. His voice cracked like dry earth during drought season. I agreed she would disappear. I gave her money, set her up in that small apartment, promised to take care of you both from the shadows. The room felt too small suddenly, the air too thick. Aduni gripped the photograph so tightly the edges cut into her palms. But you didn't take care of us. We had nothing. Mama worked herself sick trying to survive. Chief Olumide's face crumpled like paper in fire. The powerful man who commanded boardrooms and bent politicians to his will looked suddenly, utterly broken. I sent money every month, he whispered, his voice barely audible above the hum of the air conditioning. 20,000 naira, sometimes more when business was good. Enough for rent, food, medicine, school fees. I thought... He broke entirely. You were using it to take care of us both. Aduni's world tilted again, puzzle pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. The mysterious friend who sometimes brought groceries when things got desperate, the stranger who paid for her secondary school fees when Mama Kemi was too sick to work, the anonymous donor who covered the hospital bills during her mother's final months. Someone was stealing it, she breathed, the truth hitting her like a slap. Through the study's French doors, she could see Mrs. Falake lounging by the pool with her society friends, diamonds glittering on her fingers, designer handbag worth more than Aduni's mother had earned in a lifetime. The woman who had shared her sister's face, but not her heart. The woman who had watched her twin's daughter scrub floors while her own daughters lived like princesses. Chief Olumide followed her gaze and nodded slowly. Falake intercepted the money. She said it was for the good of the family, to protect the twins' inheritance, to preserve our reputation. She promised she would ensure you were cared for when... He couldn't finish the sentence. When Mama died, Aduni's voice was flat, emotionless. The pain was too deep for tears, too vast for anger. The photograph slipped from her numb fingers, floating to the Persian carpet like a fallen leaf. In the photograph, her parents smiled at the camera, young and hopeful, and believing in a future that would never come to pass. Outside, Mrs. Falake's laughter rang across the garden, bright and beautiful and utterly without conscience. Aduni's hands trembled as she clutched the DNA test results she had somehow managed to obtain through a friend who worked at the medical laboratory. The numbers on the page might as well have been written in ancient hieroglyphics for all the sense they made to her racing mind. But the conclusion was clear as daylight. 99.97% probability of paternal match with Chief Tayo Olumide. She had confronted him that morning, demanding the truth with a courage born of desperation and fury. He had broken down completely, confessing everything: the affair, the cover-up, the years of guilt that had eaten at him like acid. But it was Mrs. Falake's reaction that would be seared into her memory forever. The sound of the front door slamming announced Mrs. Falake's return from her Thursday bridge club. Her voice carried through the mansion, sharp with irritation, as she berated one of the staff about a missing piece of jewelry. Aduni took a deep breath that felt like swallowing broken glass and stepped into the foyer. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. Mrs. Falake looked up from berating poor Tunde, her eyes narrowing as they took in Adun's unusual boldness. "Have you lost your mind? How dare you speak to me like—" Aduni held up the DNA test results like a sword. The papers caught the afternoon light streaming through the stained glass windows, casting rainbow shadows on the marble floor where she had knelt and scrubbed so many times before.
Mrs. Falake's face went through a transformation that would have been comical if it wasn't so terrifying. Color drained from her cheeks, her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, and her designer handbag slipped from her manicured fingers to hit the floor with a dull thud. 23 years, Aduni whispered, her voice growing stronger with each word. 23 years you watched me serve you, knowing I was your husband's daughter, knowing I was your niece, knowing my mother, your own twin sister, died believing she had been abandoned. The truth hung between them like a blade suspended by a thread, ready to cut through decades of lies and silence. The Olumide family gathered in the living room like actors on a stage, but this drama had no script, no director, no promise of a happy ending. Fumi and Bukola sat on the cream leather sofa, their faces mirrors of shock and confusion as Chief Olumide's confession washed over them in waves. 23 years of lies crumbling in the space between one heartbeat and the next. "Sister?" Bukola whispered, the words sounding foreign on her tongue as she stared at Aduni with new eyes. "You're our sister?" Mrs. Folake had retreated into cold silence, her armor of denial wrapped tight around her like expensive fabric. But her hands shook as she gripped her teacup, the only sign that the perfect Lego Society wife facade was finally cracking. Chief Olumide stood by the window, his shoulders bent with the weight of confession. "I've already contacted my lawyer," he said quietly. "Half of everything I own should have been yours from the day you were born. The houses, the businesses, the accounts, it's all yours now if you'll have it." Aduni looked around the room that had been both her prison and her home, at the marble floors she had polished until they gleamed, at the family she had served without knowing she belonged to them. The irony tasted bitter as unripe mango on her tongue. "I don't want your money," she said, her voice clear and strong as morning prayers from the mosque. "I want something worth more than all the gold and Legos." She turned to face Mrs. Folake directly, forcing the older woman to meet her eyes. "I want you to visit my mother's grave. I want you to apologize to your sister for what you stole from her, from both of us." Mrs. Folake's teacup shattered against the marble floor, the sound like gunshot in the silence. For the first time in 23 years, she had no words, no schemes, no way to maintain control. As Aduni walked toward the door, her head held high with dignity no one could ever take from her again, she heard Bukola's voice behind her. "Wait, please, we'd like to know our sister." The sun was setting over Lagos, painting the sky in shades of gold and redemption. For the first time in her life, Adunyi Onmide was walking toward her future as herself, not as a maid, not as a secret, but as a daughter finally coming home. If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone, give it a thumbs up, and hit that subscribe button, because everyone deserves to know they belonged somewhere, and every family secret eventually demands its day in the light. See you in the next video.